Welcome to episode 5. Maybe our last one, maybe not. We'll see where it goes, Gabe. But the beautiful mind in the beautiful game. And today we're going to be talking about taking responsibility for oneself. Why don't you introduce yourself, Gabe, and talk a little bit, just briefly, about that topic that you came up with?
Yeah, for sure. Let's just say this is season one, the first
Yeah.
10 episodes, and then we'll see what happens. If we're going to be renewed for another season, we'll see by the powers that be. My name, my name is Gabe Nosair. I'm a transformative life and performance coach. I work with parents, athletes, and coaches, all with the idea of getting to know oneself on a deeper level and operating more from a conscious side, more from the heart. Because, the world of sports, there's plenty of opportunity for ego, as we both know, Chris. It's all about shifting from that into a much more heart-centered space, and performance can increase that way as well. We get so caught up, I think that a lot of athletes, they love their ego and they flourish with their ego. But there's a much more conscious way of doing things. Why don't you introduce yourself before we jump in?
Yes, my name is Chris Wehan. I played professional soccer for 7 years, and now I coach athletes that are really trying to reach the next level, but most importantly, become conscious and aware of things that may be holding them back, keeping them from performing at their highest level, particularly as it pertains to the mind, and using my experience of where I thrived and where I learned some lessons in that regard. So that's how you can work with me. But yeah, let's dive into it, Gabe.
Yeah. So yeah, this idea of taking personal responsibility, we're essentially born into this illusion that things outside of us is what fulfills us, right? Especially in the Western culture where we have to buy all these things, we have to look a certain way. We very quickly learn to blame other people. We watch people argue with us, and we feel like other people are responsible for our feelings, and so this outside in illusion, it really is an illusion and it's false, but we're so programmed to believe in it, that it really takes us away of who we are and our responsibility. And I believe that there's the reality is that we live life from the inside out. And one way I usually get people to understand this is, when I would, especially when I do workshops with people, I say, okay, like, you have a referee who makes a bad call. Who believes that that referee's call made you react the way that you did? And they'll all raise their hand pretty much. Maybe there's an outsider who doesn't raise their hand, and I'll usually ask them, and they, sometimes they give me like a good explanation, and usually not. But that's all right. That's all part of the journey of the workshop and to understand it. And so, I often will give an example of like just like like the referee, for example, or a soccer team. If let's just throw out the U.S. men's national team, if if the U.S. men's national team was responsible for how everybody felt about themselves, everyone would be the same fan of the U.S. men's national team, right? But in reality, it's because a lot of us from the U.S., we want to cheer for them and root them on. But if you ask their biggest rival, the Mexican national team, and their fans, like, oh, do you feel the same way with the U.S. men's national team? And they're like, no, this is our rival. We don't like them. So really then you can start to see, well, it's all based on so many different factors: where you're born, where you live, what you believe in. And the same thing can be said for political opponents, like they're all neutral, really. So it's all of our perspective, all of our thinking of how we really believe about what we believe about these people and what we believe about these things. And then when people start to see that, they start to shift. I'm like, okay, yeah, it really is about me. I'm like, yeah, your life is created by your thoughts. I remember when I worked with you, you're very fiery against referees, and you'd get really wound up, you'd expend a lot of energy,
Hmm.
arguing with the referee, and you and I did some work, and I saw a big shift in you. Tell me about that, because that kind of leads into this, if you're willing to share.
Yeah, I think particularly as it pertains to referees, and this has really kind of been the theme of my life recently. And I think working with you was a great learning lesson for me as it pertains to the referee, where when like it's really hard to contain that reaction, right? Sometimes the game can be so emotional, whether every game is emotional, but some games there seems to be heightened emotion for whatever reason. If in my case we're playing El Paso Locomotive, or we're getting towards the end of the season and every point matters, we're fighting for a playoff spot or we're fighting for a home playoff game. And so that emotion can sometimes bring out reactions with us, and particularly as it pertains to the referee. They make a call, and sometimes you just react based on the emotion of things that are going on or things that are going on inside of you. And yes, I agree that more often than not, that reaction is just the referees get that channeled at them, even though the emotion doesn't belong to them. It really belongs to me. And I think just becoming aware of, hey, that the referee isn't in it to ruin my game. They're just here to do their job and try to do it at the best of their ability. And I also think I started to realize that, yeah, I think if I kept a lighter mood with the referee, if I also started to just treat them as a human being and talk to them and understand that they have a lot of emotion going on inside themselves and a lot of their own internal thoughts and reactions to things, that I can sort of use that to my benefit. And really, I think more importantly, if I just had a lighter mood with the referee, it kind of just allowed me to have a lighter mood and energy throughout the whole game. And I agree with you. It was when I see, I particularly watch this in Messi a lot now too. I would say majority of the time is very light and very, focused on himself. And he doesn't expend a lot of energy towards his teammates, and he doesn't expend a lot of energy towards the referee. But on occasion, he will expend a ton of energy towards the referee and get himself into a bit of trouble, as we've seen post game in some matches for Miami. And yeah, I can see it easier. And I remember in those times where when I was more conscious of it, when I was like really going in with the intention, like, I'm not going to let the ref take my energy away. Like, I recognize that they may make bad calls, and it's still hard for me not to put some energy towards the referee. But if I can put that in a better way, like just talking to them calmly from the start, that way when a big call happens, that they're more willing to interchange with me, and so that there can be an understanding. And I can also be like, hey, I saw it this way. And then they're more receptive to hearing that, rather than when you treat them as if, like they're the enemy. You almost don't converse with them, and then all of a sudden you converse with them in this like big emotional interchange. Then their reaction is like, it's a harsher startup, I guess, as I should say.
Yeah, for sure. There are ways to kind of manipulate a ref, and I think that's part of the game. If you're constantly badgering them and yelling at them for everything, these are human beings. They're supposed to be neutral, but I'm like, no, they're still humans. And I've seen to where there's one Spanish ref in particular, I can't remember his name, but I remember he refereed the what was it? The quarterfinal of Brazil against Colombia in the 2014 World Cup. Spanish ref, and every game I've seen him, he gets overly involved, right? Because his ego is saying, "I want to be the star of the show." But there are ways to try to talk to a referee in a much more conscious way to like maybe get a future call, right? Because sometimes referees, they'll know like, oh man, I messed that one up and I'm going to owe them a call or the next hard tackle. If I miss that hard tackle on this team, I kind of need to let them even it out, because if I go in and card them for something that I didn't card the other team for earlier, then it's just the referee's going to lose control of the game, you know? So, you know, there are ways to like talk to a referee or kind of convince a referee to be like, hey man, you know, next time you owe us one or something like that. But you know, you don't say that, but you know, you can get to a referee, and that's all part of like understanding like, hey, they made a bad call, I'm going to let them know in a conscious way, but that way you still maintain the power, right? When you lose your stuff for your emotions and you start going on these tirades, you know, you lose your focus, you know. And sometimes players are able to shift into that, but I'm sure you've seen it before with your teammates and opponents, that sometimes players, coaches, they just lose it and they completely lose focus because they're giving their power away.
Yeah. And I think the thing that came to me too is how often do we see like one moment lead to the next in sport, right? And when a ref makes a call, it's a bad call, and a number of players lose their focus and start channeling their energy towards arguing that call rather than, you know, maybe having a reaction to it, but that reaction lasting 1 or 2 seconds, and then you're completely switched on. Okay, where do we set the line? Who's in the wall? You know, who's marking who? You know, like let's get switched on. We have a moment to defend rather than, you know, being switched off, spending like minutes on the referee. Then all of a sudden, by the time the game comes on, you're then trying to get your focus back. The ball's getting served in, you know, the other team's attacking it, scoring on a free kick. And now that moment, you know, there's nothing and then they're still arguing with the referee.
Right.
And the game has passed them on. The other team's celebrating, and all the momentum has shifted. Yeah. And so that I think is the biggest thing for collectively. But I think also the other part that I started to recognize in myself is that I was in my professional career, I was rarely given the captain's armband, but I did start to recognize later in my career that I had a lot of leadership about me, so that players were often looking to me on the field to sort of drive them. And if I was constantly, my energy was constantly being taken away by the referee, it's hard for other players to follow in that, or really, you know, they sort of start to get distracted by that, I think, you know, especially, and Messi, I think, is a perfect example of that. He is the leader by example, and the way he plays the game and the way he, you know, his energy towards attacking and scoring. He doesn't spend his energy on defending these days, but the way he is when the team has the ball, he drives the team, not by his words, but by his actions. And so, as you know, when I watch them and I see young players, when he's distracted, his energy is going towards a referee or opponents. It's sort of hard for other players to follow that energy. It becomes a bit confusing, and I think you don't recognize how much that takes away from the collective.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, you lose focus, and that's what it's all about, is like, you know, you feel like you lose control, right? And somebody else is trying to take something away from you, from the thing you're trying to accomplish. You know, and that happens in all walks in life. Like you think of like coaches who do the same thing, right? They're blaming the ref, they're blaming their own players, you know. And you know, there's a difference between blaming your players and also understanding they're not upholding the standard that you want, you know. And even then, like a coach who can take personal responsibility for that will look at themselves and be like, okay, what did I do? You know, we talked about this a couple episodes before, the Syracuse head coach making his team run after a game where they came back, they didn't play their best, but they came back and won in overtime. You know, and you say, I'm trying to uphold them to a high standard. And to me, it's like, I think it's more powerful to look like, okay, what did my leadership lack in this game to make my players, you know, not play their best and not play their most focused, you know? it takes a really strong person to be able to look at themselves, but that's where it all starts. If let's just say, for example, and I don't know how the rest of their season's going to unfold, of course, but if the coach is blaming the players, make them run, which shows like it's the players' responsibility and not the coach's, then the coach will never be able to look inside and be like, how can I prepare better for next time? Maybe he can. Let's give him the benefit of the doubt that he's trying to do a little bit of both. And the best coaches will be able to do that. It's like, okay, how can I prepare my team better? And the same with parents. It's so easy to point fingers when, your athlete is not playing or not performing up to their standard, and, things are political in their mind. But again, it's like it's pushing all the blame, giving all their power away to something outside of them, instead of saying first, like, okay, what can I do, to better support my child in this moment, and also understanding like, hey, what can my child do? Like, maybe they're not doing what they need to do. And it's nice when you hear a parent actually be able to understand that. And I actually had that experience one time with a player who I had very early on my club team. And then we found another player who played his position, who's more athletic, juggled more. And that parent came to me and said, I don't see my son doing the things that he needs to do on his own, and I can't push him. And I said, yeah, I can't either. I can push him in practice, but ultimately he's having somebody to kind of push him into that. And ultimately they left the team to find a less competitive team, which was a better fit for them in the long term. But it takes a very mature parent to say like, hey, they're not taking their own responsibility in their hands. And that happens quite a lot, that finger pointing. You seem to have that internal drive for yourself though. Like, did you always have that within you to be like, hey, this is about me. The harder I work, the more I'm going to get out of this.
That was always clear to me from the physical standpoint that the harder I worked, then the greater chances that things were going to happen for me. And, I think I spoke back on it in times where I learned lessons, where I was sort of, not given the opportunity to play because I wasn't there, whether it be the time my club coach benched me or the time I redshirted in college or the time that I didn't get drafted into the MLS and I had to go to the USL and earn a contract there. And all those things just show me that, hey, you're not quite there physically. You got to develop yourself and work hard and get back to the fundamentals of just showing up to practice every day, not expecting anything, but being grateful for the opportunity and work hard. But from a mental standpoint, that's been more difficult. And I think particularly when you kind of came up with the theme of today's conversation, it really brought me back to the experience of getting, let go, essentially, of getting fired. And I've thought a lot about experiences when, coaches get let go in the sporting world. And it's always interesting to hear opinions in the way coaches speak about it or the way clubs or organizations speak about it. And it's a really difficult dynamic. And oftentimes, I think we're sort of shown, unfortunately, in this world that oftentimes people will just blame other people for the situation and say, this coach wasn't good enough, so we're letting him go. And of course, that may be the reality. And in my experience as well, I got let go for things that were in my control and things that were out of my control. But at the same time, there's a balance to it, right? And I think it all starts with looking at yourself, of saying, okay, where did I make mistakes here? Where do I need to work on and focus on to better myself for the next scenario or the next situation? And there's a balance of standing up for yourself at times and saying, I guess it becomes tricky. And maybe I'm going to phrase this more as a question to you of when things happen for coaches or players, Let's take a coach, for example, a coach that is in an environment that they know isn't gonna, like, it doesn't align with their standards. They're trying to do everything that they can to push the team, but they get let go, and they have to take accountability for themselves, because we all have responsibility in situations, whatever it is. But being able to stand up for yourself and say, hey, like this, I take accountability for this, but you need to take accountability for this. But also letting go, not getting caught in, I think in my experience, I got caught up on a lot of wanting the other party to take responsibility. For my case, I wanted New Mexico United to own their part of it, but also that isn't for me to, that was putting my power on them.
Right. Yeah. No, it's exactly. Yeah. That's the ego or the false self shows up in seven different ways, and one of them is martyrdom, right? That we're the victim. And
Mm.
like the we're always wanting somebody to feel badly for us. That's where the martyrdom, my teacher calls them dragons, but that's where the martyrdom dragon really thrives, is like, hey, I really want people to feel sorry for me, and that makes me feel better. In a way, it makes me feel validated that they are feeling sorry for me. um, and when I'm a firm believer in that the energy you put out is the energy that comes back to you. So, if you feel like you're a victim, you're always going to create that opportunity for yourself to be a victim. So that one's a really hard one to get out of, and, you know, essentially what you were looking at, correct me if I'm wrong, is like you were feeling really down about yourself and the situation that you were in, right? And, you could take part of that responsibility, but you still were searching for somebody else to, what if they said, yeah, Chris, we messed up on this one. We're really sorry. Like, would that have changed your perspective?
Not really.
Very clear answer right there. Nice and
Yeah.
short. Yeah. How so? Like, how would you have still navigated through
Be-
that?
because ultimately, that is irrelevant in the situation. And I think through the work that I've done, I can see that clearly, right? That part of it is irrelevant. It's all myself, right? It's all the way I was internalizing things, the way I was viewing it, the way I was giving power to other people, my energy. Yeah, at the time, I was saying to myself, "Oh, if they do this, then it'll all be better." But if they would have given me a guaranteed contract, it would have all been better. No, it wouldn't have all been better. It
Mhm.
wouldn't have made me, face things in myself that weren't serving me, recognizing that the way I was viewing my world was creating my reality, like you said. The way I was, I believe that what I was giving off was exactly what I got back. It presented it to myself. And obviously that is a hard concept, I think, for people, because you can't recognize, right? Like, what I was doing and the energy I was giving off resulted in something that was different, but it was because of what I was doing. And sometimes it's hard to see those clearly, but when you start becoming more aware, like we've talked about, of yourself, then you can start to make those correlations clear. Like, oh, okay, yeah, I can see how I was being a victim. I was wanting other people to feel sorry for me and to put their arm around me and say, yeah, this is messed up. This is messed up, and that
Yeah.
wasn't the best way to go about it.
Totally. Yeah. The false self is very seductive. It can really creep in there and start to run the show. And, the telltale signs, the false self, when it feels under threat, right? The threat is like, I'm not good enough, right? That's like one of the biggest threats, or I'm not lovable enough, essentially. That's really the root of it. So, it does two things. It either wants to attack or defend, attack and defend. Like that way it feels better about itself, because it's like that's the ego, is can be so fragile, and it wants to do everything in its possibility to not shatter. Because
Mm.
when your ego shatters, what are you left with, right? It can be a very dangerous thing. for the self, right? For the self-esteem. And um, so, but when you can shift and you can ask yourself, like, okay, I don't like this situation. Um, I had my responsibility. Maybe even they had their responsibility, but still, what is this bringing up in me? And when you can ask that, you're back in the driver's seat of your power, you know? Because, yeah, sometimes people make decisions that aren't in your highest good and maybe are coming from their own shadow side and their own ego. And that's just kind of the way humans are. You know, we all are like going through this thing together, this thing of
Yeah.
life. And you know, when you can just step back and say, okay, hey, this is bringing up some self-deprecation, which is another one of the ways that the dragon that shows up for the false self is self-deprecation. So I'm feeling down on myself, you know. And why is this? Well, you know, I'm in danger of losing my career, of my self-identity, of being a professional soccer player, professional coach. You know, with parents, it's like, okay, my ego is under threat and my child's ego is under threat. So it's like double whammy there. So it's like
Yeah.
you're trying to defend your own false self is stepping up to defend your own self and also wanting to defend your child's false self as well, you know. So you can say like it takes a really kind of mature it's there's a maturity involved in it to be able to say, okay, this happened, what is it bringing up in me instead, and what do I need to do, how can I shift and pivot? And you know, when you're stuck in that outside in illusion, you're always believing other people are responsible or other things or situations are responsible for your own well-being, then you're just going to keep repeating that cycle. And you know, I think that's where a lot of I can see a shift in consciousness happening within sports, in life in general. So sports is going to be affected as well. There are other industries, entertainment industry, like a lot of different industries are starting to happen because there's like a global movement towards more self-awareness and consciousness. And I think that's where a lot of athletes are heading this way. You know, one is Aaron Rodgers, who
Hmm.
is out there and he's really shifted from that outside in perspective to the inside out, and being able to like take personal responsibility for his own actions. And he has a new documentary out on Netflix that you can see after he tore his Achilles recently. You can kind of see his own personal journey into still having that determination to like get back on the field, but also having this deep connection with himself. And not just with himself, but like a big part of it is like we're all interconnected energetically, you know. This is why I love Star Wars, because it's like George Lucas talked about this a long time ago. It's the idea of the force, you know,
Mm.
that everything, we're all part of the same energy. We just happen to be in, like, you and I happen to be in two different bodies, but we all come from the same source, you know. And when you start to see that, you can start to see that everybody's just having their own experience in life. But two, like, hey, I'm going to take my power back and I'm going to really do what it takes to be a better player, whether a better coach, better parent, whatever it is in life, you know?
Yeah, you've hit some incredible nuggets in all of the things that you're saying. I love your phrase of saying that it's seductive, right? It's seductive to see things from the outside in. That's kind of the way society has shaped us a little bit and shown us. And I believe also a little bit it kind of wants to keep us in that. It's a little bit, whether you say it's profitable or it's beneficial to whatever, to have people viewing things from the outside in and making that shift from the outside in to the inside out. And in my experience has been painful. It's been, like you said, the ego gets shattered and you recognize, the way you view things and how that isn't maybe the best way to view it. And some things arise in you that when you face them, when the mirror of life shines it in on you, because that's kind of what it is in my experience of going from the inside out, the mirror of life, my wife, my kid, my, you know, just the way I view things or define things. When you recognize that, it can be extremely painful. It can be an extremely painful process to shift that way. And there's so many things that are trying to pull you back into that. No. Come back to the other way. And I think the way looking at the world from the outside in is the path of least resistance. It's much easier to view things that way. Mm-hmm. And it's a much harder, but such a more beautiful, beneficial experience to make that shift and to see things and to, like you said, grab your power, like take your power back. Be like, oh, wow, like it's within me. Like I control it. Like, you know, it's being that player of recognizing in simple terms, like, oh, I can be like full of energy and love and excitement. And like, if the referee makes a bad call, like, so be it. Like, it might frustrate me, but that frustration is going to fade away in seconds now, you know, as opposed to days when I'm going home still expressing this frustration towards a referee, a bad call. Like, yes, that's going to be the reality of sport always. You know, there's going to be things that are out of your control, but the way you internalize it, the way you express your energy towards it, that's within your control, and that's gaining your power back.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you can identify these things about yourself, you know, you can say like, oh, this is the self-deprecation dragon, you know, going again. You know, I'll just throw it out there, all the 7 different ways. And there's a
Yeah, please.
great book to read that it's called Transforming Your Dragons by Jose Luis Stevens. He's one of my teachers, and I'm very blessed to have learned so much from him. So it shows up in 7 ways. You know, there are 6 that are paired with each other. So there's, you know, a pair, and another pair, and then one is neutral. The neutral one is stubbornness. You know, and they all have like positive and negative poles. You know, a positive pole of stubbornness is determination, and that can be a really good thing for like, hey, I want to get this down. I'm going to keep going. You know, and then the negative pole of stubbornness is, you know, doing something that you know is not good for you, and you're going to do it anyway, just to kind of feel like you have control. And that's where the stubbornness dragon comes from. You know, when you feel like something was kind of, you had the rug ripped out from underneath you as a child, or you didn't have say in a lot of things, which is why like helping a child to have control over certain situations is so beneficial, you know, so that if they do develop stubbornness, they can do it from the more positive pole, you know. And it's also, you know, that negative pole is also, it's not just doing things that aren't good for you. It's also avoiding the things that are good for you as well. Like, I know this is better for me, but I'm not going to do it anyway because I want to be in control no matter what. Like, my control is more important than doing something that's actually going to be better for me. So many people go through that, you know. So the pairs, there's greed. And the pair of greed, you kind of go back and forth with the pairs, is self-destruction. And you can see that greed is like, there's never enough, right? You always want more and more and more. And then from that, you can lead into self-destructive patterns. You know, there's a fantastic documentary I'm watching on Charlie Sheen right now on Netflix. And that he's like the perfect example of somebody who has the self-destructive dragon, you know, and it pairs in there with greed, right? He wanted more money, more women, more drugs, like all these things, and it led himself into a self-destructive process. So that's greed and self-destruction are paired. We talked about martyrdom earlier, right? The feeling that, you know, I'm the victim of everything. And then that's paired with impatience. And impatience is really like there's not enough time to do all these things that we want. It comes from having, well, the biggest thing is you can inherit impatience if you have an impatient parent or parents. But it's also if you feel like you're being rushed around all the time, you can like that develops into this, there's not enough time, you know. And you know, the positive pole of impatience is daring, you can be daring to go do these things. And so sometimes it can help to be impatient, like, no, I'm just going to go for this. What I've learned in life is it's better to just like kind of wait for the right moments and kind of then pounce. And the negative pole of impatience is intolerance, and that's intolerance for situations. They're taking away, you're taking away my time to be able to do this, or you become intolerant of other people. And then there's arrogance. That's a huge one in sports, right? The feeling of superiority, that they're a special person. But there's also a big aspect of not being vulnerable. And vulnerability is like the biggest fear of somebody with the arrogance dragon. And, because we don't want to be found out. We want to feel like we're important and superior. So if we're being under threat, it's really like, it's like, no, I'm going to hide in the shadows. Um, and that one, it can be used for good as well. The positive pole is having pride for yourself and what you do and how you take care of your body and all the training you do. But then the negative side is vanity. And that's like how I look towards to other people and how I appear physically. Cristiano Ronaldo like definitely goes in between those two, right? Whenever he scores a goal and takes his shirt off and flexes his abs,
Yeah.
which is like fantastically blessed, like physical specimen and athlete, but he also takes a lot of pride in what he does, right?
Yeah.
And the pair of that of is self-deprecation. And that's like the people who don't believe in themselves. I'm not good enough. I'm stupid. Like, they beat themselves up either verbally or on the inside. So, it's interesting to see like somebody who can go back and forth between arrogance and self-deprecation. Because they're like fluffing themselves up and then beating themselves down. You can see it in their body language like this, right? But then you can see their body language like that. They get their chin up, and then when they're under threat, they're kind of like shrink and they're hunched over.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's pretty amazing when you can say like, oh, now there's that arrogance again. Okay, let me slide into that, and to the other side and be more humble. Um, because it all starts with awareness of when
Yeah.
you're operating from your shadow. Then you can be like, there's that again. Let me shift and stay focused.
Yeah, I think that's really well said because every one that you mentioned, I can draw upon how that's shown up for myself.
Totally.
And that's part of becoming aware that we're talking about. That's becoming more conscious, understanding, and particularly in sport. But I keep saying that like what the things that we're talking about, yes, use it through sport because you can sort of really see the results. But man, you can take these lessons in your life as a whole. And that's where I think it becomes really powerful. Not only does this develop you as a top athlete, but this can develop you as just like a great, well-rounded person. And when you're talking about all those things, a big theme for me recently too has been, like bringing some of those, you call them dragons, right? The negative aspect to greed or self-deprecation, but also like loving myself through it, of being like, like that showed up in this way, you know what? And well, yeah, that's not me operating from my highest self or operating from the best version of myself or, in line with God or creator or the universe. But I can see, I can have some love for myself in that process. I was, my mind got in the way and having grace with yourself rather than, I think a part that I've noticed in myself and I see in other people too is like when they face it, I think that's part of why I said it's really painful is people when they bring it up, like they shame themselves for things or experiences or beat themselves up more. And when that comes up, that's why I think they want to just put it away or why even myself, I'm like, I don't want to face this because, I'm shaming myself for that or not happy with the way I dealt with it, but rather loving yourself through the process and accepting all these things come up in every single one of us, and we're all, like you said, we're all in this together. Some of us appear, further along the way, like a Cristiano Ronaldo. He's got millions of dollars. He's this chiseled, ripped guy, but he's probably facing his own demons based on his life that he went through with an alcoholic dad. And, he's been able to channel that in a positive way. But I guarantee if we had him right here, he would say, yeah, those things affect him every day. And it's just how he brings them up, addresses them, and channels it in the positive direction like you spoke about.
Yeah. And you're absolutely right on hitting this, that sometimes we don't want to look at that. And that's part of the human journey, is to integrate all parts of yourself and to know, like, I made some decisions. I said some things that I would never do again. And I could feel shame. I have felt shame about these things, but you're right. It's important to try not to get caught up in shame. And I personally have go through this as well with like certain parts, the kind of I realize where I'm at in my stage is the more I am aware of myself, I can still look back to old versions of myself and things that I did and said and be like, oh my God, Gabe, like what did you say? What did you do? And then to shift, instead of feeling that shame, to like, this made me who I am today. And, if I said and did those things again now and in the future, then okay, then we have a problem. I'm not learning. But, that's how we grow. That's how we evolve. That's how we get stronger. Before we started this recording, you and I were having a conversation about that, of like, with kids, like kids need to learn and to evolve. And so if we're trying to protect them from having any kind of like negative experiences, it's going to stunt their growth. And why would you want to do that to your child? Like, for all the parents, all the coaches out there, like, you grew the most from those adversities in life. So just remember that and let your child have those adversities. And there's a lot of kids in the world who struggle and have natural adversities. And in the soccer industry, it's people pay a lot of money and can afford those things, and they have kids who have pretty, like, relatively stable lives, and not all of them, of course. So it's like, how do we give our children those rites of passage in life to help them grow? And to, not necessarily look for those like dangerous situations, but, if they're not getting playing time, let them feel that struggle, and give them that encouragement to, like, how do you work yourself out of that? And sometimes it's just by leading by example, by what you do in your life as a parent and what you say, how you talk about yourself, how you talk about others. That's, your kids are going to pick up on those kind of things. I just wanted to backtrack a little bit about the dragons, just so people know out there that kids are playing around with all of those. They're going to experience different ones here and there. So don't say like, oh, my kid's 6 years old and he has the impatience dragon. Like, they all have that, right? But so we all kind of like go through them in our childhood, adolescence, before, like, kind of around our early 20s, we finally settle on two primary ones. That's not to say we still can't experience all the other ones, and especially with stubbornness being the more neutral one. If you have stubbornness, which a lot of us do, then you are more apt to, play around in all those dragons as an adult. So, don't go psychoanalyzing your children is basically what I'm saying. And what's really helpful is, you not only get to know yourself, but you can notice other people, like, oh, hey, I can see that person has like some self-deprecation going on there, or, oh, that's the arrogance dragon. I can see that in that person, and then not take it so personally, right? Because if you come across somebody with an arrogance dragon and then you start to shrink within yourself because, you don't understand what's going on, you can be like, oh, there it is, and it becomes more neutral. And like, that's life.
Yeah, and I think what you're touching on is a really key point for the player-coach relationship. And I recognize that, in myself. But yeah, it was certain, that's one of those things that we can't control, is how another person carries themselves and goes about their business. And unfortunately, from a player's perspective, you cannot control the coach. If they're open and they're aware and they're willing to hear it, you can guide them. And, you can be the student and the teacher at the same time. But oftentimes players aren't in that role. They're the student to the teacher. And when you can start to become more aware of yourself is the most important thing, but then you definitely can see it in your coach or other people and how they're behaving. And I think it does put it in good perspective of saying, they're coming from, this self-deprecating or, greed, whether it be, one thing I heard recently was, this coach behaved this way because he just wanted to go to the MLS. And, he's coming from that place of greed. And so when you start to recognize that, what would you say to come from a place? I mean, I think it's most important to come from a place of love, but I guess a question for you would be, as a player, if you're starting to recognize certain things in a coach that you don't align with, that affect you, how would you recommend that they be aware of that and not beat themselves up over it?
Like if they're being criticized or something?
Well, I think in my case, it was, recognizing a coach that was, I'm trying to think of a dragon that they would have been coming from when I'm trying to remember back. But let's say a coach that was just really operating out of fear because they didn't want to lose their job.
Mm-hmm.
And they were really critical of everyone. And when the game went our way, it was, yeah, let's drink a beer together. And then when the game didn't go our way, it was like, I'm going to come after every single one of you.
Right. I think, a good way to look at it is to understand the person. Like, okay, they're coming from fear, right? And maybe they have like arrogance behind their message, right? Because arrogance, a lot of it is like criticizing other people, right? Because, you push them down, it builds you up with the arrogance dragon in your mind. That's totally an illusion, of course. It doesn't actually do it.
Yeah.
So, for me, what I tell people is like, hey, okay, I can observe that in them, but let me hear their message and what can I take to actually say like, you know what? They're right about that. Their delivery, their timing, their tone was absolutely terrible and not beneficial for team culture for me. But let me get back on track with like taking like, hey, maybe I do need to be more aggressive in the final third, or whatever it is, so you can try and separate like the message from the person if there is something in there for you, and also the delivery like I talked about. And then you go back to essentially it's all coming back to like presence with what you're doing, like these dragons, the shadow side, it can be used to really propel you forward if you do it in a positive way. Because how many times have you been like pissed off with like, somebody tackling you from behind and it like increases your level of intensity, right? In a game.
Yeah.
Talked about this in an earlier episode. Like with that level of intensity, you also have to have a high level of focus, and that's what it took for me as a player and even as a coach, where yeah, like somebody put in a tackle or said something to me I didn't like, then it like all of a sudden I clicked on another level. So you can use it for positivity and be like, all right, yeah, let me increase my level of focus and my level of intensity, because I don't think there's a limit to intensity and focus. I think you can bring it to a game, but then you can always like increase it more. Like maybe there is a limit, I don't know, but essentially everything in life like coming back to the present moment of what you're doing. And when you're present, you're focused.
Yeah. I think that's great. I can recognize totally in myself where, being around a coach, giving that message, the delivery was terrible. The timing was terrible. The language around the message was terrible. But yes, maybe there was some nuggets, but I couldn't even get to that message because of those three things. And it would start to take my energy away. then the meeting would end and it'd still be taking my energy away. But I think I almost like wish I had the capability to come back to the present moment. Okay, what can you do to bring that back to the present moment? Do you need to dunk your head in the ice tank? Do you need to sit at your locker for 5 minutes afterwards? Just bring yourself back to your breath. Do you need to write a couple things that you're grateful for? Do you need to, just put your boots on and walk around the field to come back to your breath, to get back to the present moment, to just be like, okay, that doesn't affect me anymore. I'm at practice now, and I can just focus on kicking the ball and trying to do that to the best of my ability and have fun doing it. I think, it's not, but I think too, what I recognize in that, like I said earlier, path of least resistance. It was easier to just complain and chat with my buddies and laugh about it and make jokes about it, unconsciously recognizing that was just taking the energy away from me, taking me away from the present moment. All right, that was behind us now. That didn't matter anymore. And the next thing that mattered was being there, being at practice, and being present in training to just, build brick by brick to improve your ability to be the best athlete.
Yeah. When you start to kind of develop this understanding and self-awareness, it's very healthy, and you're on the right track if you can laugh about yourself, and laugh about things that you did and said, and like, oh God, there's that, they call it the Buddha's laugh. We're able to just laugh at that side of you, the false self that keeps showing up. It's not going to go anywhere. So, we may as well embrace it. It's made out of love. It's made to help us grow. We're the only beings on this earth that experience that. The trees, they're not there being like, well, that tree has, more leaves than I do, or it's growing faster than I am. That's why nature is like of the highest frequency, and it feels so good to be in nature. And, we're complicated beings. We're like these spiritual beings having a human experience on this planet, and it's quite a journey to like go back. And I think those tricks that you gave, dunking your head in ice water, getting back to your breath, those kind of things, especially the breath, it really helps to regulate your nervous system and to shift your energy, by doing those kind of things. So kudos to you for bringing that up.
Yeah, those are just, I think sometimes the athlete needs the tangible things that they can do to, build themselves along the process of being because that's a kind of a physical thing that can tie in the mental side of being more present. So I think the athlete sometimes, that's how I was too. I need sort of a tangible thing sometimes to do, or action steps to take to get myself back into the present moment.
Yeah. Totally. And, it all starts with that personal empowerment of taking responsibility for your own life, not putting it on your teammates, your coaches, the fans, the referee, like other team, like always take that responsibility for yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And understand that it's going to be hard sometimes to face that, but by continuing to become more aware of that, it becomes easier and easier, I think, to address those dragons and and then get to the place of laughing about them and understanding that, here they are again, and they're here to make me better. And well, what's the lesson in this? Okay, I can see that.
Exactly. Well said, Chris. Well said. Yeah. Chris, how can people get a hold of you?
Yes, you can. My website is www.codecreatesc.com. I work with athletes, particularly on a one-on-one mentorship basis. I offer a free 30-minute discovery call. That is the best way to get a hold of me, also on Instagram or on YouTube. What about you, Gabe?
My website's aclearmind.com. Like I mentioned earlier in the show, I'm a transformative life and performance coach. Part of my work is I do focus on teaching like the dragons and also the roles in life. There are 7 roles as well. You can get some of that in some of the programs that I have, especially if you're a parent. I have a program called Raising Resilient Athletes that talks about those kind of things. And it's all getting to know the self, not feeling shame about it, but just knowing that self-awareness is going to really help propel you in all walks of life. I also have a program coming up called the Conscious Soccer Coach. So be on the lookout for
Awesome.
that. Yeah. So yeah, Chris, man, I can't believe it's been 5 episodes already, and this mini series is
Yeah.
a close, but hopefully the stars align where we can do a second season.
Yeah, I hope so too, and I hope people found benefit out of this. I certainly found benefit out of just hearing you talk, so I really appreciate that. But thanks for collaborating with me on this series, and hopefully, like you said, stars align, and there'll be many more episodes to come.
Hopefully, yeah. Everybody make sure and subscribe to both of our channels so you catch
Yes.
everything that we put out there. All right, Chris.
Yes.